Hello and welcome to an all-new episode and indeed all-new series of the Magical World of G. Michael Vasey podcast. I am G. Michael Vasey and I like to have chats with people in and around the magical community. And we just talk really from an autobiographical perspective and just chit-chat about what's going on and what we're up to. And hopefully in the process you find that interesting and informative. And if you do, please would you like, share and subscribe to this podcast. And I'm very excited about my first guest, Pam Gregory. Pam has been involved with astrology for 45 years. It's her passion to help people. She sees astrology as a profound and sacred language of geometry and meaning that helps us to see the bigger picture. Now, if you're anything like me, you've been tuning in to Pam's wonderful YouTube channel and taking strength from what she's had to say this last 2 or 3 years. And indeed, that's where we started our conversation. Honestly, your videos have kept me and many others, I think, sane during a period of mass stupidity. And if it wasn't for listening to you and people like Rory Duff and some of the others, I think I would have gone totally nuts in the last couple of 3 years. But luckily I managed to hang on to my sanity and survive. So here we are today. And I'm still watching your astrological videos and find them extremely useful, far more useful than many others. And I think it's because of the way that you approach astrology, which we'll get into. Where I'd like to start, though, is what got you started and interested in the first place? When did this begin?
Yeah, it was very simple. Directly after university, there was a recession here, so I didn't even try to get a job. I'd always, since I was about 10 years old, I'd wanted to emigrate to Canada, you know, big skies, big nature, etc. And so I'd actually been writing to Canada House since I was about 11. Saying, you know, I'm going to emigrate. So as soon as I finished my degree, I got on a plane with $100, flew to Toronto and started with nothing, started a new life. And in that first week, I joined a yoga class. This must have been an incredible period for personal growth. I must look back on it astrologically, but I joined a yoga class and somebody in the class said, that chap over there, that big chap from Jamaica, he's an astrologer. So at the end, I went up to him and said, look, I know nothing about this, but I'd love to have my chart done. Yeah. So I went to see him a week later and I spent 7 hours with him and it just blew my world apart. That there was this whole world, hidden world of meaning that I'd been completely unaware of up till that point. He went back in my life with specific dates and events and etc. And I haven't stopped learning since then.
Right, because obviously most people who don't have a great deal of familiarity with astrology tend to think of it as the horoscope in the newspaper and these days are on the website, or at best probably having somebody prepare some kind of a chart that looks good and you don't know what it means and then tell you some future that's going to happen to you. But in fact, as a trained magician, I look at astrology in a rather different light. I look at it as the sort of forces that are operative at a particular point in time and how they relate to my personal development. And I think, isn't that really the way you approach it?
100%. And in fact, only yesterday afternoon, I put out a video which didn't have any astrology in it called Ghosts in the Theatre. And it was really, Gary, saying exactly that I see astrology as half of the picture. It's mathematical probability, the probabilities that are likely to happen, but it's like a sheet of music. It's up to us how we play that sheet of music. It doesn't come alive. It isn't created until we co-create, until we interact with it. And that's very much how I see astrology, that it isn't fated. It isn't the stars doing things to us. We've got to move beyond that victim mentality and say, no, this is something magnificent. This is our unique map, if you like, cosmic map for this lifetime. So how are we going to play it to its best and its highest and its most magnificent? My job is, how do I help people live a bigger life, a contribution? And so, yeah, I absolutely see it like that it's only half of the picture. The other half is us, because we're co-creators.
Now, I've always wanted to ask, is it really the birth date or is it the date of conception?
Oh, well, that's a tricky one to pin down, of course. I mean, a lot of astrologers have tried to look at that, but you can imagine, can't you?
Yeah.
Getting the exact time, and well, you can, that's quite funny. I mean, you can just imagine the difficulties in doing that. So no, it's the actual date of birth, of arrival. And once you get, that's very interesting, Gary, that once you, I mean, I do this when I'm working with clients, which I barely do these days because I just don't have time. But if someone is unsure of their birth time, particularly, I will go back in their life and ask them 30, 40 questions that have a black and white answer. Did a parent die at that time? And you couldn't say sort of died. So it's a yes or it's a no.
Yes or no.
And then when I pin down all those dates, that will either confirm the birth time, or if they say, well, that all of those things happened, but they all happened 6 months earlier, then I know the birth time is about 10 minutes earlier or later, and then I can make that work, and then everything works like clockwork, both backwards in the life and therefore going forwards. So the precise birth time, this is a very interesting topic, because the precise birth time for this lifetime is extremely important to get right. Otherwise, nothing in the chart works. And things I'm saying are going to happen, or the probability of them happening in 6 months' time might be 3 years out. So I've got to get that time right. But then that gets into a very interesting discussion of, well, time only really exists in 3D. So it's just for this third dimensional lifetime. And once we shift to 4D, and particularly 5D, maybe I can retire, because that birth time probably won't operate in the same way. So what will astrology be then? I don't know.
Well, the other thing I notice is that you deal in some I've watched many of the videos where you get talking about a particular, more what I would consider to be quite an obscure influence in astrology, and you'll explain it and say it's important at this particular point in time. Like I'd really never heard of North Nodes and South Nodes and Chiron and some of these other things that you've talked about. So you obviously know your stuff in depth, and it brings to mind how important some of these other influences can be that the normal astrologer probably doesn't even look at, because they just look at sun or moon sign.
Yeah, and you will never, ever, ever, ever find me anywhere just talking about anybody's sun sign. If it was that easy, it wouldn't have taken me, I won't tell you how many years to achieve competency. It just wouldn't have been that difficult. So I never talk about sun sign astrology, because that's what trivializes, this masterpiece into an advertising jingle. So I will avoid sun sign astrology like the plague. And I started to get very interested in the nodal axis because it is dominant. It's the most important thing in Indian astrology. But at the time when I was studying, it was barely mentioned in Western astrology. So it got me very interested. And as I was writing that book, boy, did that take me on a magic carpet ride, because I was actually going through my own inverse nodal return. The transiting North Node was conjunct my natal South Node. And boy, did that open up past lives for me, and how issues from past lives were very significantly leaking into this life, particularly connected to a past life in Cathar, France, and all that. I mean, boy, that would be a great Dan Brown movie, actually. That would be a terrific movie, because the scenery was so dramatic as well. But so the nodal axis became so rich that I started to see the chart no longer as circular, but kind of having a point to it, almost like a teardrop at the point. And the North Node for me became a compass needle in your life, that you have to fulfill that at the soul level in order to feel satisfied in this particular lifetime. And everything else in the chart is the cavalry, just backing up that projected North Node soul's path of growth. And that became very exciting as a thought of how we can reframe our lives, if you like, at a deep spiritual level. So yeah, I loved, I think both my books have been channeled, actually. So, I can't take much credit, they just came through me. But that one in particular, was magical. It has a magical, it's soul-based, the nodal axis. It's not kind of personality based, it's at the soul level, because the soul is just weaving this kind of infinity symbol through all of your lifetimes and connecting them.
It's been interesting for me living in Czech Republic for the last 15 years, and how many of my colleagues on the magical side have said, well, Gary, you must have had a past life there, or have some reason, purpose to be there. And in the last couple of years, I've been chasing energy lines and mapping them, working a bit with Rory. Found all of these Templar connections to these lines in this part of the world, even to the point of basically trying to interpret strange symbolism on Templar churches here in the Czech Republic and thinking of them as sound patterns and then getting back to the solfeggio frequencies. So I've discovered, that everything is not what it seems, and sometimes the forces that be have a plan for you and send you on these trips that at the time you think, well, what the hell is this? But eventually you start to figure out it has some meaning, and it's resolving some issue. I wanted to, some of the people that listen to my podcast may not know of you or your videos. So I wanted to see if you could kind of summarize the message that you've been putting forward in terms of the period that we've been through and what's going on, because I think it is very important, and it's something that I see as well, but from a different perspective.
Yeah, fascinating. I love the way these modalities crisscross actually and connect. It's starting in 2032. And if you accept that, and to some extent this links with Rory's work as well, we are now at the midpoint of those from 2012 to 2032. This astrologically, for me, is the most intense year. This is the big battle, if you like. Spiritually, this is the most intense year. And it's going to stay intense at the 3D level. Of course, we don't have to live at that 3D level. We can be on our eagle's perch observing it, but it's going to stay at that level, I believe, through this year and even reach a crescendo into October, November, December, particularly in the US, and that's going to cascade out across the rest of the world. As we get into my humble view is that as we get into kind of April time, 2023 and beyond, it starts to become a little easier. And then by December 2024, we get another easing in the situation. We get another progression. That's interesting, of course, because Rory Duff has talked about December 2024, all of the Earth's harmony lines come into, all of the Earth's energy lines come into harmony for 200 years of peace. So that's very interesting as well. But my sense is we will see more green shoots of new Earth starting around April 23. I mean, what's interesting astrologically, if we go back to March 2020, on March 22nd, 2020, Saturn, planet of limitation, moved into the sign of Aquarius, which is the planet of freedom. So limitation on freedom. On March 23rd, most of the world went into lockdown. Saturn is staying in Aquarius until March 2023, and then it moves out. So that is one of the signals, astrological signals for me, that if we play our cards right, then those issues will ease up. However, and I want to say this very loudly, Saturn in Aquarius is a kind of John the Baptist to a heavier planet moving into Aquarius at the same time. Pluto is a heavier planet with a slower orbit. There is a very strong shadow side to Pluto moving into Aquarius, which is essentially controlled by technology. And you can see that timeline clear as day. It doesn't need me to explain that. It's very obvious. That's the shadow side. One of the most positive expressions of Pluto in Aquarius is the power of the people. The people taking their power back in community, in collaboration, grassroots up, forming new groups, new communities. This is happening all over the world. It is phenomenal what is happening in those groups. It is so exciting, and having been deprived of human contact for so long with lockdown, the simple joy of being with other humans is just ecstasy. It's just joy, it's just wonderful.
Yeah.
And so there's no top-down structure, there's no one-upmanship, there's just simple human connection, which is all about let's come together in a heartfelt group, and how do we make this world a better place? How do we create?
I think everybody that I talk to sees this quite clearly in the world that I inhabit anyway. But the average person is quite a different animal. And there's still people that are afraid to go out and wear masks and mask their air conditioning in their car and so on and so forth, How do we reach these people? Or is it not our job to reach these people? Is it our job to simply imagine a better future and with the heart? Is that
Yeah,
what we're
that's a
supposed to do?
really good question. And I think it's a question that has plagued many of us, obviously, because for those friends and family we love, obviously we want to help. And I think, like many people in the beginning, with sort of dear friends that I've known for a long time and I love, I would try to sow seeds of, isn't it funny, or have you thought about it this way, or etc., etc. But it was like they literally couldn't hear me. It's like they'd go deaf. And ultimately, I came to the conclusion that that was their soul's journey, that was their soul's contract, and it wasn't up to me to interfere with that. So all I could do was send love and still love them as who they are. And we still get together and we laugh and talk about, we don't talk about the elephant in the room, we talk about the simple stuff. But I still send love because they are dear, dear friends. And I've come to the conclusion that is the best thing to do, because if you get into trying to persuade someone of something that they're not yet ready to see, that can end up in lots of arguments, which lowers their vibration, which lowers your vibration, and that isn't going to get you anywhere at all. So I've managed to retain those important friendships and keep the frequency high, certainly for myself, and doing the best I can for them by staying off those subjects and just sending love. Every day I try and do that. I try and live through my heart all day long. And that really has helped enormously and soothed me that they have chosen that path for this lifetime.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a geologist, a PhD geologist, so I'm a scientist of sorts. And since the age of 14, I have been extremely concerned about the path that we're on with respect to climate change, because I see absolutely no evidence at all that CO2 drives temperatures. Actually, in geology, we think temperature drives CO2, the other way around. And we think that it's that big golden thing in the sky that drives the climate, and that climate is continually changing. And our job is to adapt to those changes. And we are an opportunistic species of tremendous ability to take opportunity of change. And I know some people will find issue with that and disagree, but it seems to be that this is part of the whole thing, in the sense that it's continual bombardment with fear. And I came across just before I started the Zoom meeting, I was looking at something I downloaded the other day, which shows a glass with ice cubes in it and a level, and the glass with the ice cubes melted and the water's at the same level. And it's Archimedes' principle. It's what happens when you melt ice caps that float in water. Because half of the kids that my daughter's friends, half of them are absolutely petrified that at some point in their lifetime they're going to be inundated with the oceans. And I keep trying to explain to them that by the time that happens, they'll be, long, long, long gone. What is it about this fear? What is it astrologically that's sort of set the scene for the ability to really create fear and confusion in your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, certainly astrologers knew that when we were going to have this big conjunction between Saturn and Pluto on January the 12th, 2020, we didn't know what was going to happen, but we knew that was a very rare signature of contraction and control, and also a strong theme of abuse of power. So the last time it happened in Capricorn, the conjunction between Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn, was back in 1517, 1518, when the church held a huge amount of power, and Martin Luther was nailing his 95 Theses to the doors of the Wittenberg church and really challenging the church on that excess of power. So we knew that was coming around again. It wasn't likely to be the church because they have less control generally in society these days, but Capricorn is very much top-down structures, governments, UN, WHO, big institutions and corporations that have had power over our lives. So there was going to be some very strong control exerted from those authorities in some way that picked up on this theme of abuse of power. And so we didn't know what was coming, but that's what was happening. So for this particular episode in time, that's what started it. But frankly, Gary, if you look back over hundreds and thousands of years, and I was saying this in the video yesterday, we've just been in a hamster wheel of next big scary thing, next big scary thing, poverty, war, disease, little green men, next big scary thing. So it's just copy and paste, next big scary thing. And once you've observed that, you just kind of step back from the whole thing.
Yeah.
And you can become very detached, and particularly if you switch off mainstream media, which I would very strongly advise people to do, you instantly rack up your frequency and you become on this kind of what I call the eagle's perch. Your observer perspective say, yep, that's meant to be playing out in the 3D world. It's definitely a timeline because it's happening. It's not my timeline. I'm going over here to create something lovely.
What I learned during the lockdown here and the two-tier system, where I couldn't go to the pub, the movie theatres or anything else, was that by going out into nature and being with the goddess and chasing earth energy lines and looking for vortices and doing the meditation work, this kind of thing, it really just, it was like, to use a word that probably shouldn't, it was like being inoculated against the madness, was this ability to get out into nature. We were not stopped here from being able to go out into nature. And very few people did, of course, but I did. And I just found it incredibly a wonderful releasing experience to be with nature, connect with the planet, connect with planet Earth. And then you started to think to yourself, this is I don't need to worry about any of this stuff. It's nonsense. It's just to stop me from doing this, what I'm doing right now.
Yep. And like you, Gary, nature is my balm. Nature is my shot in the arm, you might say. Yes, absolutely. So, and the Japanese call it forest bathing, don't they? And there's a lot of research to indicate that it changes your physiology, it changes your blood. There's an uplift in your psychology, your emotion, if you spend time in nature. And nature is so real. Nature will never lie to you. Nature just is. And I actually think that nature has gone up an octave, at least an octave, because the colors are so bright. So whatever's happening in the skies, etc., nevertheless, nature seems to be jumping octaves. And we know that from the Schumann resonance, etc., etc. So, and all the photonic light that's coming in and the new information that's coming in from the coronal mass ejections that are happening so much more. So, nature, Gaia is going through her own upgrade. And the more we can plug into that, the more it's going to sustain us and calm us, ground us literally. And that's my go-to place.
Well, is it winter solstice? This last winter solstice, my girlfriend and I, we went on a trip. We were going to what is an old Templar church to have a second look at some Type 4 lines that have a vortex there. And it was really interesting that the skies that day were just incredible. And we were driving along and I suddenly realized there were three suns there. There was the middle sun and the two side suns. And we stopped and we spent some time and we kept saying, well, this is just amazing. There's something really weird about the energies in the skies today. And later that evening, the most amazing colors with sunset, not just where the sun was setting, but behind as well. The whole sky was pink, red, orange. It just felt to us that day that something shifted, something really big happened that day. And we both looked at each other and said, it's finished. The COVID nonsense is finished as of now. It'll take some time, but the energy, something shifted that day. Was there an astrological aspect to that, the winter solstice period, that would explain that?
Absolutely. They are they're always very powerful because the ancient peoples know this, as you will know, Gary, that they had ceremonies and sort of very important celebrations around the solstices and equinoxes. And again, you probably know this, but the essentially the magnetosphere becomes cracked very often around the solstices and equinoxes. The solar winds create these massive cracks, which means that we are much more open to information coming from the galaxy. And anyway, the magnetic shield around the Earth, as you will know, has dropped very significantly as well. The sun's magnetic shield, the Earth's magnetic shield. So we're much more open to new information. So these surges in energy are happening all of the time. But yes, certainly that solstice back at the end of last year was incredibly powerful, because that's when we had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. That's when they were sort of entering Aquarius. And that began a whole new, essentially 800-year cycle, because they hadn't, what happens across 800 years is the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction repeats every 20 years in one particular element for 200 years, and then it shifts into another element. So for the past 200 years, roughly, that conjunction has happened in Earth. And the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction is about the prevailing social and political zeitgeist, if you like. So that was around life being very material, that you had a bricks and mortar home, you had a job for life, home for life. It was very materially focused. Now it's shifted into air as of the end of last year. And so that is really shifting into a whole new 200-year era of information, experiences, and everything being much lighter and faster. But what it's also done is initiated a whole new period where the energies coming into the Earth are really unprecedented. I mean, Rory talks in his work about our solar system is moving through the photon belt, which it only does roughly every 12,000 years, give or take 500. But also the number of coronal mass ejections, M-class and X-class flares we're having in a day very often is more than we had in the whole of 2018. And they all carry new information for us.
And the Schumann frequency has been behaving extraordinarily strongly as well. I notice, I track that quite a bit. So yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely on board with Rory's ideas. Funnily enough, we're both geologists, which and we're both geologists, and we share a few other things as well, which we found quite amusing at the time. And I think Rory is really doing something tremendously positive and useful in terms of finding these vortices, these places of power, and encouraging people to meditate at certain times of the year in those places. And certainly that's what I'm trying to do here on a micro scale, is find those places and encourage people to join us, in those locations. We found a vortex just this week, in fact, and it was in the middle of a forest, and the bees were there en masse. So all you could hear was the bees buzzing. And we realized that the frequency of the bees buzzing was close to the solfeggio frequency that we discovered in the Templar Church. And I mean, it's just some of the stuff you find doing this work is just outrageously. I mean, people would look at you like, are you a lunatic? But it's really, really valuable stuff, really.
Wow, that is incredible. I mean, that's really groundbreaking, excusing the pun, isn't it? I mean, that's wonderful discoveries, because I mean, Rory is such a pioneer, but it sounds like you're being a pioneer in your area as well. That's phenomenal.
Well, I'm glad Rory exists, because he's a real scientist, and he's done a lot of work trying to understand what these things are and how to classify them, which is a typical geologist approach, actually. Mm-hmm. And I'm benefiting from that now, because I'm able to talk with him and say, well, it's a type 4 line, and we know what we're talking about. So it's a common language, and we're getting there. And I really wish him all the best with his initiatives, in that regard. I wish I lived in the UK and could actually, physically join him, but I live here and I'm doing something here, so that's good stuff. Moving along, one of my interests, of course, is paranormal activity and the supernatural, and it may not be your particular forte, but I like to ask about it nonetheless. Do you ever see or hear things Have you had any experiences with ghosts and ghoulies and things that go bump in the night?
No, I haven't had any experiences of ghosts and ghoulies and seeing things and hearing things in that sense. I've had some, really astonishing experience with, how can I describe, other kind of spiritual events and things
Right.
manifesting and that kind of thing, which have been absolutely, I have no explanation for them, absolutely no explanation. And they have been deeply moving. I've often just stood there kind of open mouthed for a long period of time thinking, I have no idea how that just happened.
Yeah.
There was an experience, gosh, this is going back a few years ago now, and I was having a Reiki session actually, and the Reiki master was saying, the room has been just full of love, and had your mother here, and she'd passed over by then, but she was an amateur rose gardener. And I came home and I thought, well, I don't see my mother, I don't feel the love, I didn't see the roses. And I opened my wardrobe door, and there's only one wardrobe in the house, and I've kind of traveled all over the world. And right at the very front of the wardrobe was this tiny baby sweater, lamb's wool sweater, hand knit, with two perfect red satin roses sewn onto the collar, and my name, Pamela, which is what my mother called me, hand sewn onto the label. Tiny baby sweater. I have never seen that in my life before. And I lived in Canada, spent time, I've traveled all over. I have no explanation of where that came from, but it was right at the front of the wardrobe. Couldn't miss it. And I still have it. I have no explanation for that. So things like that have happened, and you think there's something going on.
Yeah, no, things like that are great. That's all, that's the kind of experience that I think really makes you understand that. Well, it's a kind of coincidence or a synchronicity as well, in a sense that, or an event that sharpens your focus on something that you need to pay attention to. That's the way I see. I think I see those kind of things, and when they happen, it really is quite amazing. Just as a sort of an aside, we were following a north-south type 4 energy line, a 90 pace wide pair, this weekend, and I had an inkling that it would go to this place called Kunstadt, which is now just a small town, but it used to be the lords of Kunstadt ruled for 500 years more or less everything in the region, and there's an old chateau there and a lot of history. So I thought, oh, it's heading in that direction. It's undoubtedly going to pass there through, I shouldn't do this really. So we drove to Kunstadt and we went around the chateau. I dowsed in the car, which I probably shouldn't admit to, but I do. And we couldn't find anything. So as we're driving away from the chateau, I'm all disappointed, that theory was blown away. And all of a sudden, I still had the rod in my hand. As I'm driving away, the rod twists, and sure enough, I find the two lines still parallel and still very close together. And I just stopped the car and sat there shaking. And Eva said, what's wrong? I said, well, that building there that those lines go through is the building that my ex's brother and his girlfriend lived in. And I visited the only place in Kunstadt I've ever been to 3 or 4 times. And the lines passed through it explained this to me, And it's those kinds of, it's a similar sort of event, it's like, what are you trying to tell me? Something is trying to tell me something of importance. And until you figure that out, they keep trying, they keep doing the same thing over and over again, don't you find?
Yes, absolutely. Until you really get it, they must be shouting at us sometimes until we get it. That, clearly you are very sensitive and tuned in already, so they don't have to shout so loudly to you. But yeah, and they are magical moments, really absolutely extraordinary magical moments. And I love it. And that's going to happen, Gary, as you well know, more and more. We're becoming more psychically sensitive, more telepathic, more tuned in. We're more of the light body as we move through this ascension. And, that's so exciting. And of course, all of this light that we have on the earth, which is more than we've ever had before, even though it seems very dark at times, is simply showing up the darkness, because the light is brighter in those dark, murky corners. So we just have to recognize that, and we just have to keep on keeping on creating.
And do you combine astrology with anything else like chakra or Reiki or anything along those lines, or is it purely astrology for you?
Not healing modalities, but 2 broad things that fascinate me are the spiritual in general, and all that I've learned with that over the years, but also the scientific. I'm very interested in trying to scientifically validate how reality works, and for instance, in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be interviewing a wonderful, very distinguished gentleman called Professor Robert Temple, who has written a kind of paradigm-shattering book called A New Science of Heaven. He's an absolute expert on plasma. And I'm very interested in that, because my hope is that if we can better understand plasma, that is the kind of interim stage in reality. Because if you say to people, well, you just kind of create from ether, from air, well, how does that work? I can't imagine that. But if you can explain that your frequency, your thinking and your emotion become a kind of frequency band, and that forms particular crystals of coherence or incoherence in the plasma, which is the interim step to creating manifestation events and matter, then you've got something that people can kind of hang on to as an understanding of the building blocks of reality. So that's going to be a very interesting session, and I'm really hoping and he's also got some thoughts on about how astrology works within plasma. So that's going to be a very interesting. So I'm very interested in the science, because it helps to explain astrology, but in a sense, it also helps to validate it.
Yeah, I'm very interested in quantum mechanics and quantum physics, difficult stuff to understand, but I think it helps to explain quite a bit of what is going on. I think that the sound ideas that Rory and people are also talking about is another area that I'm trying to explore and learn more about, because it does seem, in the beginning was the word, it does seem that sound is much more than we give it credit for. And if you look at some of the ancient humans and what they were capable of doing, the use of sound or frequency starts to be a viable explanation for some of the things that they could do, which we've lost that ability. So I'm also interested in stuff like this, sound in particular.
And there's a wonderful professor of music at one of the London music colleges who discovered a few years ago, I mentioned this in one of my books, discovered a few years ago that the sound on the 11th harmonic shatters cancer cells.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And there's some particular underground chamber in Malta that in some way emanates that 11th harmonic, and people go there to heal.
Wow.
So there's definitely something about this was Rife, wasn't it? And the Rife machine in the 1930s that he invented, that every disease has a particular frequency that his machine, his brilliant invention, can counteract and form coherence. Clear the blockage in the plumbing, as it were, to get you back to coherence. So absolutely, sound, frequency, energy, vibration is absolutely what this universe is made of. And that's going to be the medicine of the future, as Edgar Cayce said. That is where we're headed in terms of the medicine of the future and our understanding of the earth, Yeah, 100%.
Great. Well, I've used about 40 minutes, which is about the usual length of my podcast. It's been really good fun talking with you, and I really enjoy what you're doing and wish you lots of luck in pursuing it. Can you just tell us a little bit about where people can find out more about you and where they can see the videos and maybe buy the books, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. My YouTube channel is Pam Gregory Astrology, very busy channel, and but I also usually upload the videos to my website. That is just pamgregory.com. The books you can buy online. I no longer post them from home because it was taking up just crazy amounts of time. It's just madness. Yeah. So you can buy them online, but the description of the books is on the website too. I also have quite a few teaching videos that people can buy via the website as well. So, but yeah, there's a lot going on, particularly on the video side. I also write about a 6,000 to 7,000 word monthly newsletter, and that's freely available on the website as well. There's a lot.
Not quite as long as Rory's, though.
Makes mine look like Jack and Jill, actually. Honestly,
I have no idea how he puts that thing together.
It's epic. It's
like a PhD thesis once a month.
Honestly, I salute salute him, or
Yeah.
respect. I don't know how he does it, but yeah, very impressive indeed, with some phenomenal material. I mean, I hope he's archiving it somewhere because it's precious.
It's on his website, I think. I think you go and look at all the back issues on his website. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, good. Well, again, thanks a lot. I do thank you for taking the time out to talk to a person you never met before. But I shall be watching your stuff. Maybe you can watch some of mine as well and see what I'm up to here in the Czech Republic now that you've met me.
Sounds
And
fascinating.
thanks very much, and have a great rest of the day.
Yeah, and you, Gary. Absolute joy to connect with you. Thank you so much for everything you're doing in the world as well.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye for now.
Bye. Well, thank you again to Pam Gregory for being my guest on this first episode of an all-new series of the Magical World of G. Michael Vasey podcast. Please do join us in subsequent episodes, and do take the time, please, if you enjoyed this, to like, share and subscribe. My name's G. Michael Vasey, and I thank you for listening. Goodbye.